Which Baltimore Ravens players are entering make or break years? We talk about that and more next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we returned here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. Of course, we're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube. And we're back with a Tuesday edition episode. Still in that lull period as we kind of work our way to training camp, and still a couple weeks to go. So we're going to be filling that out with some Ravens content here. Looking back at history, talking about the Ravens as they stand right now, previewing the season a little bit. Here today, I was thinking about what I wanted to do for today's show, and I thought about make or break years, because every year on every team, there are players who you can really say, all right, this is the make or break season for this player or that player. And so for today, I wanted to dive into Baltimore's players entering that as we head into training camp, whether it is a make or break season, a make or break training camp based off of even just a roster spot. So in the second segment, we'll talk about the offense and the offensive players. In the third segment, we'll talk about defense and the defensive players. In the first segment, though, I did want to talk a bit about Jimmy Smith. And I know Jimmy Smith has not re-signed with the Ravens. He is still out there in free agency, has not made a decision as of this recording, whether he's going to retire or not, or sign somewhere else, or re-sign with the Ravens, whatever it may be. But Julian Edelman on the I Am Athlete podcast, a clip came out of him saying the player that he hated playing against the most was Jimmy Smith. And it was kind of an answer that the hosts of the show were surprised about, and he kind of went into detail. So I wanted to kind of talk about like how underrated Jimmy Smith is/was, especially in his prime when he was healthy, because it's a guy who did so many amazing things in a Ravens uniform, and somebody who, again, like, I just don't feel like is not that he doesn't get respect, because he does, but I feel like he's still underrated. And this will stem, I think, a bigger conversation later, whether in a couple weeks or whatnot, about most underrated players in Ravens history. I think Smith falls under that category. So we'll talk about Jimmy Smith in the first segment a little bit and kind of talk about what Julian Edelman said and how it all ties back together. So yeah, so a lot to talk about here today on the show. But if you're here with us on YouTube in video form, you see my face and my background and everything else. Be sure to subscribe to this channel, like the video. Our goal is 2,000 subscribers, about 15 away at this point. We're really creeping up on it. I appreciate everybody who has subscribed. And if you're thinking about doing it, why you should subscribe is because we put out daily Ravens content 5 days a week. So news, opinions, analysis, historical perspectives, anything on this team. We're putting out content Monday through Friday. So be sure to subscribe, like this video, and comment down below as well. And also, if you hear this in audio form, thank you as well. Our audio community growing at a very rapid pace. I'm excited about that too. Thank you for listening, whether it's on your way to work or on your way home from work or wherever you're listening, however you're listening. Thank you. We're available Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you get your shows. And also be sure to follow me on Twitter at KOstricker34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. So let's talk a bit about Jimmy Smith now. Smith is a player, obviously a first-round pick of this team, and really somebody who I think was so good for so many seasons. Now, obviously, the big thing with Jimmy Smith was his health. He only played, and I have it right here, only played in 2 full seasons for the Ravens ever since being drafted. Again, first-round pick in 2011. And yeah, only 2 full seasons. Those came in 2013 and 2015. Never made the Pro Bowl. Pro Bowl talent, but again, it was the health. He, especially later on in his career here, where his play did start to take a little bit of a downturn. He only played the past 3 years, so 2019, 2020, 2021, it was 9 games, 11 games, and 10 games. I mean, actually, so ever since 2015, which was his last full season that he played from a health perspective, he didn't play more than 12 games in a year from 2016 to 2021. Kind of something to think about there. So he was missing time left and right, very, very nagging injuries, it felt like, too, where he was questionable going into a lot of games, would play through some injuries as well. But they missed him. They missed him in the worst ways. And I know when a decision is made for Jimmy Smith, whether that is he signs somewhere or signs with the Ravens or retires or whatever his next career step is, we'll talk about him in detail then, too. But a season that sticks out to me is 2014. The 2014 season, I thought that team had it. Like, I thought that team had that championship. He only played in 8 games that year, and they obviously lose in the playoffs to the Patriots that season. But it wasn't just Smith that went down. I mean, they were signing guys. That was Rashawn Melvin. They were signing all these guys late in the season. If that secondary had held up, I thought the Ravens, and to this day, I think the Ravens would have won that Super Bowl. Obviously, Tom Brady coming back from 2 14-point deficits in that Patriots team. And speaking of Edelman, he said that, Jimmy Smith was a long guy and they always gave each other problems, and they were playing Baltimore a lot. He said they were playing Baltimore like twice a year at that point, because it was usually, once in the regular season, once in the playoffs. That's how it went for those years a little bit, especially earlier in Jimmy Smith's tenure. But they were playing each other a lot. And so Edelman said that, he knows your tendency, his tendency when players play like that. So he won his battles, and Edelman won his as well. So it feels like a big respect thing, I think, for Edelman, in terms of, this guy gave me a ton of issues. But people refer to Edelman as more of a slot guy, right? People think, oh, Edelman, what are you talking about? Edelman's a slot guy. Jimmy Smith is an outside cornerback. But Julian Edelman talked about, now he was on the outside earlier on in his career, and he's a guy who was versatile when he did play in the league, and one of the better receivers in the league for a long time. Someone who would always put up constant production with Tom Brady in that system. The system worked. It worked for Edelman. It worked for, obviously, guys like Wes Welker and Danny Amendola, some of those receivers as well. And obviously guys like Randy Moss also flourished in that offense. And you can go back years and years and talk about all Tom Brady's receivers. But, those are some of the ones that come to mind off the bat for me immediately. But for Jimmy Smith, someone who was always around the football, a very sticky guy in coverage. And again, the later years, like if he does end up playing in 2022, he's not what he once was back in the prime days of, the 2015 season, 2017 season. He ended up actually is a career total for now only 14 interceptions. And you think, well, a guy playing from 2011 to 2021 right now, only 14 interceptions. That's not a lot. Well, I think it speaks to Jimmy Smith. Teams did not want to throw at him. They did not want to throw at Jimmy Smith. When they did, Jimmy Smith prioritized breaking up the football, getting around the football, just making sure the ball was incomplete. But teams weren't really throwing at him a ton, especially when he was healthy and on his game. And it speaks to the player that he was, because really he was a key piece in that defense, especially, again, prime Jimmy Smith, healthy Jimmy Smith. Not so much like if the Ravens do end up re-signing him, and again, it doesn't seem entirely likely at this point because they have so much secondary depth right now, he would be like a 4th, 5th corner on the depth chart. When Jimmy Smith was their number 1 guy, he was tasked with covering all these incredible talents at wide receiver. And for the most part, he would hold his own. He had bad games, right? Everybody does. But he was somebody who was very technically sound, was able to get you off your game. And I'm not saying he was the best cornerback in the NFL at any point, but he was definitely up there in terms of best corners, not a player that I think a lot of people understand or recognize, just because you look at it and you think, oh, well, he never had a 10 interception season. He was never that ball hawking guy. In fact, he never had a year above 3 interceptions, and he only had that twice in 2015 and 2017. So he wasn't a player that was going to get around the football a ton. Only 3 sacks in his career. You don't look at the stats with Jimmy Smith. There's so much that he did beyond the box score. And so with Edelman saying this for a player that, they were rivals for a while. I mean, the Patriots and the Ravens, they had that the Brady rivalry connection there. Obviously, it's a bit different now with Mac Jones there. They had lost to Cam Newton a couple years ago too, but those matchups, they're always hard fought. They're always down to the wire games for the most part. I mean, the Cam Newton game back when Cam Newton beat the Ravens, it was a game that came down to the wire. The Ravens couldn't pull it out. It was the monsoon game where the skies opened up on that Ravens final drive and they cleared the second the Patriots got the ball back. But for a player like Jimmy Smith, who did so many good things in a Ravens uniform when he was in his prime, when he was healthy, that was the thing. I mean, if Jimmy Smith was a healthier player, I think we'd be talking about him a bit more, not as an underrated player, but as one of the best cornerbacks in Ravens history. I still think he is in that conversation, but we'd be talking about a potential Hall of Fame player, obviously multiple Pro Bowls, in my opinion, all pro selections, whatever you want to say, because he was that guy. But at the same time, in reality, he was a player that, 8 games, 9 games, 11, 10 games, 12 games, that was the majority of his career, which was he was getting injured during games. He hobbled for a lot of his career. So it's unfortunate that it had to go that way for him, but a player that Julian Edelman obviously respects. And, when every player that he could have named. He chose Jimmy Smith. So I think it says something about that and the player that, again, in his prime that he was as a Raven. And again, nothing known at this point about what he will do with his career, whether it is re-signing with Baltimore, signing somewhere else, retiring or whatnot. But the player that the Ravens had in Jimmy Smith, he was a good one for those years where, I do look back to 2015, 2017 as those years. And he had others too. It wasn't just those 2 years, but an overall very, very solid player and somebody who, again, I just wish the health cards went a little better for him overall. But again, a very talented player and someone who a very underrated Raven, I'd say, in team history. But still a ton to talk about here on the show. Let me get back. We're going to be diving in to the Ravens if they will enter make or break years on the offensive side of the ball. We'll be talking about a couple of those guys coming up. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a ton to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. First, though, I do want to tell you a bit about Bet Online. And BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including for Major League Baseball. The Orioles took 3 of 4 from Chicago over the weekend, so that was exciting. BetOnline is your continued source for all your continued wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. And BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. As well as website that use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. We're back here, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you again. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us in audio form. We're here for you 5 days a week, putting out that Ravens content. But now we're going to be diving into some players potentially making or breaking their careers with make or break years. So on the offensive side of the ball, and actually, what is a make or break year? People define it differently. People set the thresholds differently for when players enter that. I think at the very minimum, being a third-year player, depending on draft position, production, etc., that can put you in that conversation. I look more towards fourth-year guys who are in their last year contractually outside of first-round picks. Maybe also fifth-year players who were re-signed to one-year deals, multi-year deals, whatnot. So mainly I'm going to be focusing on 2018, 2019, and 2020. 2021, I don't think there's enough there to say, oh, this guy has to do this year or else he's cut. Right? No, those guys still have time. They have a little runway. Obviously, the rookies, no make or break years there. I think, again, there's nothing there to talk about because they haven't played a snap of NFL football yet. So we'll also talk a bit about like training camps, potentially make or break training camps, some of these guys. But it's interesting because the fourth-year players for this team is the 2019 draft class. Now, 2018, you can look back on some of these guys like, I don't know. If you want to talk about like make or break years, you could talk potentially about a guy like Lamar Jackson, but not in the sense of, oh, he's not going to make the roster or he's not going to be re-signed. But contractually, I think in some ways it could be a make or break year in terms of him either getting tens of $1 million more or potentially losing some money. Now, I don't think it wouldn't be a lot that he would lose. Like, I don't think that if Lamar Jackson has a so-so year, the Ravens just like, oh, we're going to only pay you $30 million, and that's it. I don't think that's what should happen. I don't think that's what will happen. But if Lamar Jackson makes this year, like if he has a great season, he's putting money on the board for himself. So that's like an interesting make or break year in terms of offensive playmakers there. But again, for Lamar Jackson, it's not in terms of, oh, he's going to lose his starting job or lose his roster spot, right? That's not in the conversation. I mean, another guys from the 2018 draft class, Mark Andrews, nothing there for him. The other guys, the only two players remaining on this team, unless I'm missing something, are Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews out of that class. Hayden Hurst gone, Orlando Brown Jr. gone, Anthony Averett gone, Kenny Young, Jaleel Scott, Jordan Lasley, Deshaun Elliott, Greg Sinnott, Bradley Bozeman, and Zach Sealer. Yeah, only Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews remain from that 2018 draft class. Still a masterclass. Ozzie Newsome's final one, obviously Orlando Brown and those guys. They all did a lot for the Ravens, but it just didn't work out in terms of what they were actually doing. So, yeah, a masterclass by Ozzie Newsome in terms of that. But 2019, then we get into the offensive guys there. The biggest guy on the roster at this point is Ben Powers in terms of what you're looking for make or break wise. And there's a chance he doesn't even make the roster. Marquise Brown, first round pick in Arizona now. Miles Boykin, third round pick in Pittsburgh. I'll say maybe Justice Hill, but it doesn't even seem likely Justice Hill is going to make the roster at this point. So these are more make or break training camps because their roster spot is in danger if they don't perform. Then if they do make the roster and they don't perform in the regular season, why would the Ravens re-sign them, right? You have to make those tough decisions where a guy has talent, has potential, but if they're not showing it, if they don't show it in training camp or during the regular season, you're kind of thinking, maybe we should go in a different direction here. A younger guy, even a veteran guy, for example. But yeah, it's interesting because for Hill and Powers, those are the two guys in 2019 you look at and you say, well, there are two make or break things here. It is training camp, and it is the actual season if they make the roster. At this point, both Ben Powers and Justice Hill are off of my roster prediction. So they're going to have to do something in training camp to prove that they deserve a spot. Maybe for Justice Hill, he makes it because maybe a J.K. Dobbins isn't ready yet or a Gus Edwards isn't ready yet, and they just need a guy who has been in the league for a little bit, hasn't necessarily performed up to the expectations I think he had for himself, Ravens had for him as well. But those are two players that if they don't perform, I could certainly see either them not even making the roster outright, or if they do make the roster, them not being with the team beyond 2022. Then 2020, again, I don't like classifying third-year players in here just because I do think the fourth year threshold for me is where I like to keep it. But there's not a ton to talk about for the 2019 draft class in terms, Marquise Brown offensively not there, Miles Boykin offensively not there. So 2020-wise, J.K. Dobbins, I don't think this is a make or break year for him. I mean, it is in terms of, I guess, can he bounce back from the injury, but it takes guys some time. So I'm not putting that pressure onto him. I don't think it's a make or break year for him in that sense. Devin Duvernay and James Prochet, potentially, not necessarily they're going to lose their roster spot, make or break, but could be, can this guy take this wide receiver group to the next level? Do they deserve snaps? Do they earn snaps? It's maybe a semi make or break year there. But again, I think that these guys all deserve that extra year of runway in their fourth season before classifying them as busts or breakout players from their draft position. So I think that, yeah, the season that Devin Duvernay has this year could impact the snaps next season, could impact if the Ravens feel comfortable enough to trust him in the situation where he could be the wide receiver too, or if they want to go out there and get somebody else. Same thing with James Prochet. Can they trust him in a role, right? It's make or break in that sense. So the performances obviously have to be there for those two guys, but I don't think it's make or break in terms of, again, oh, this is for a roster spot for next year if you don't perform. I think they will still keep both guys. That's just what I think about that. And then other guys, Tyree Phillips, yeah, I think this could be a make or break year for him in terms of just where he's supposed to be. I don't think they should use him at tackle. I think he's definitely a guard in my opinion, but I think training camp, it's make or break in terms of will he win the starting job. He'll be competing with guys like Ben Cleveland and Ben Powers as well, that we just talked about. But also, I think when you're looking at it, you have a guy like Patrick McCary who could go and win that job. So there are options there. I think for Phillips, he can definitely win that starting job. I think they're going to keep him for the 2023 season unless it's like a log jam like we're seeing this year with Ben Powers. At that position, potentially he could be the odd man out. That's what people are predicting at this point. But I think that for Phillips, it's make or break in terms of if he wins that starting job for guard, can he hold on to it? That's something that's pretty interesting in my opinion. So offensively, for make or break years, you could look at all those guys. If you want to go down the rest of the roster, I mean, for veterans, Juwan James, potentially make or break for his career in terms of can he be a good either backup tackle guy or can he step in and be a starter? I know that there's a lot of doubt surrounding him and the very minimal time he had on the field in Denver. So you could look at that and say, well, it's make or break in terms of if the Ravens want to bring him back, but also if another team will want to invest in a guy like that. Training camp, make or break. You could talk about Josh Oliver. I mean, it is for a roster spot for him. I don't have him on my roster right now, but yeah, you could look at him. Tristan Colon, another guy, if he makes the roster, can he be a good backup / potentially in an event of injury, come in and perform? Can he play multiple positions? That's a player, even roster wise too. Is he able to make the roster? So it's a guy that you could look at as well. People might want to say Nick Boyle. I don't think it is for him. Maybe you could say, can he bounce back from the injury? Is this the year he can do it? Is it make or break for him that way? I don't personally see it that way, but I do know there is a small argument for it. Benjamin Victor, make or break training camp for him. Jalen Moore, same thing. These are guys who have been with the team for some time now, so it's their time. It's make or break for them, especially if they make this roster. So those are some of the offensive playmakers you can look at for make or break seasons. There are some others as well, but those are some of the main ones, in my opinion. I think that on offense, you have players. I think you're looking at Tyreek Phillips, you're looking at Justice Hill, Ben Powers as the two really make or break guys. But with some of those players, with Hill and Powers, it's can they, one, make the roster, and two, have good seasons. Those are the make or break aspects there. So very interesting to talk about when we get back here on Locked On Ravens. We will be diving into the defensive players who could be entering make or break years. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a ton to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. We're back here with our final segment of Locked On Ravens here. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you. And again, thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. Subscribe to this channel, like this video. It does help out a ton. Also, be sure to follow us in audio form and listen there. That also helps out a ton. Also, be sure to make your second listen Locked On NFL. I hosted the Monday show over there again. So if you want to hear me talk about Larry Ogunjobi, Rob Gronkowski, and Alvin Sue, I'm over there doing that as well. But let's talk about defense now. A lot of players you could talk about for some make or break seasons defensively. Again, I'll talk about 2018, 2019, 2020. 2018, we covered it already. There's nobody on the defensive side of the ball still on this roster from 2018 in that draft class. Orlando Brown, not offensive. Kenny Young, not with the team anymore. Deshaun Elliott, not with the team anymore. So those are some of those guys that you could have talked about, but not really there. 2019, not a ton to talk about here either. Jalen Ferguson was the first defensive player taken, obviously the tragic loss of life there. Then you have other guys like Iman Marshall, who, yeah, I mean, it's a make or break year for him. I thought it was a make or break year for him last year, honestly. I thought that if he couldn't, well, first of all, he did get injured, but I was thinking if he gets injured last year, then that's it. But apparently that, they bring him back, have the confidence in him. This is a true make or break year for him. I feel like it's just he hasn't been on the field at all. Well, I shouldn't say at all because he has been on the field technically, but he's only been on the field for 3 games. 3 games ever since being a 2019 draft pick is not ideal, especially when you've been with the team for all 3 years, but most of your time is spent on injured reserve. So very talented player, right? I'm not denying his talent, but he definitely has to stay healthy and actually prove himself, whether it is in a special teams role or something like that. The Ravens have a ton of depth in the secondary, so it's like Hill and like Powers, in my opinion, there, where it's two make or breaks, making the roster and making an impact during the season. If you make the roster to then earn a second contract or earn something else from a different team, that's going to be huge for him. And then other than that, in that 2019 draft class, defensively, just Daylon Mack, who hasn't been with the team for a while. He actually only played for 1 year with the Ravens and then ended up getting cut. So yeah, 2019, not a ton to talk about defensively there in terms of make or break. 2020, though, is the interesting one because I know a lot of people, and if you're here and you see the thumbnail, Patrick Queen is the thumbnail on YouTube. So my opinion on Patrick Queen in terms of a make or break season is I don't think it is. I think it's a very important season for him, a massively important season, but I don't think this is the year I'm ready to say it's make or break for him. If he doesn't perform, they have to trade him. I don't think that is what it is. He has to perform well, right? I'm not saying he doesn't. But at the same time, I still want to give him this year and next year to fully show what he is. Is that a Pro Bowl linebacker? Is it somebody who can be relied on as a quality starter? Is it someone who is more of a backup level player? Is it a player who isn't meant for the Ravens, right? There are all these different possibilities. Patrick Queen's so young, so much potential, but I'm not ready to say this is an absolute make or break. It's the only thing that we're relying on for figuring out if Patrick Queen is that guy. I think when we're talking about next year, and if Patrick Queen has another so-ish year, right? Maybe good first half, bad second half, or kind of mixed results or whatever it may be, then I'd go into next season saying, yes, this is absolutely a make or break year for Patrick Queen. But I'm going to say that for Queen, it's not a make or break year for him, but a very important one. But I will say potentially this could be a make or break year for his counterpart in Malik Harrison, someone who, again, hasn't gotten a ton of run, has dealt with a couple of things as well. I really don't like putting the make or break label on third-year guys, but in this situation, it is possible because the inside linebacker position on the Ravens, I think, is becoming a little bit less important with the ability they can use 3 safeties with especially if they keep Chuck Clark. So if the Ravens don't get a good year out of Malik Harrison this year, they potentially could say, do we need to keep him? Is this a guy that becomes expendable? I think they wouldn't like cut him outright, but I think they should still give him that fourth year. But again, if the Ravens decide that they don't necessarily need to have a player like Malik Harrison if he doesn't perform well this season, they could look to trade him for potentially a mid-round draft pick or whatnot and say, you know what, Patrick Queen, we're solid there. They could bring in another veteran, potentially like a Josh Bynes type player, and roll with other guys there and still use their 3 safety looks, bringing Chuck Clark down in the dime position. Tony Jefferson, you can play. I mean, you can do a lot there. Kyle Hamilton, obviously. So you look at that and Marcus Williams kind of roaming around, but yeah, I don't know. I think for Harrison, this is like a semi make or break year for him. I don't want to put a full make or break year on him because, again, a third-year player still want to see what he can do for the next couple of seasons before actually saying it is make or break or labeling him as something he's not, because we have seen it. Like Tyus Bowser was not on a very awesome, I'd say, track in this first couple of seasons. And he really came on after a couple of years, and his counterpart, Tim Williams, did not. But, one guy showed that he had it. The other guy didn't. It just took different amounts of time to see what it is and what it's not. So some guys, they are late bloomers, I guess I'd call it. But for Malik Harrison, I do think this is a very important year. He's going to be relied upon in a lot of different roles. So that's somebody, just a matter of week. I don't think make or break for him. I think he's proven himself off the box score. Now it's just a matter of getting on the box score a little bit, which again isn't the most important thing in the world if you're making an impact. But I still think that for a player like him, he's somebody who could perform. Broderick Washington, I don't think make or break. I'd give him that extra year. I think that he's a player that has shown flashes. I was very impressed with him. He was off of my 53-man roster last year, ended up playing his way right onto it, and a player that actually had some really, really nice snaps for them in 2021. So I'm excited to see what he can do. Geno Stone, yeah, I could see him as being a make or break guy. 2 ways, obviously making the roster and in the season, what he can do in season. So he's going to be competing with guys like Armour-Davis Washington for, I think, one of the final spots on the roster. And speaking of, I think Armour-Davis Washington, I know he was an undrafted rookie last year, but it'll be a big make or break year for him too, training camp wise, making the roster. Can he play in the slot? Can he play safety? Where's his role? So I think for him, it's a make or break season. Both Geno Stone and Armour-Davis Washington, very talented players overall. Kristen Welch, you could talk about, is a make or break guy in terms of his spot on the team. Also, someone who, if the Ravens don't need to keep all these inside linebackers, would they go with an undrafted guy like Jacoby McLean, one of those guys, Josh Ross? They could look there. They could definitely look there. And then looking down the roster, not a ton of other guys on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, I stuck really with the 2018, 2019, and 2020 draft class. Brandon Stevens, maybe. Like, I don't think his make or break in terms of roster spot there, obviously, but just where can he play? Can he play slot? Can he play safety, corner, outside? Where do they put him? I think it's going to be a make or break year to say where the Ravens are confident, at least trying him out and continuing to develop him at certain positions, but not a make or break year in terms of like play time or roster spot for him there. And then other than that, I mean, just looking down the roster, I don't see anything. Kevon Seymour, maybe like a player that is like right on the roster fringe. He's a fringe guy right now. I know a lot of people have high hopes for him, but with the secondary depth, 1, can he make the roster? 2, can he perform when he's on the roster? So the Ravens don't have a ton of make or break guys, like pure definition make or break, which is either you have a good year or you don't, and that's it. Like that's all that we're judging you on. That's not the Ravens don't have a lot of those guys. I'd say the biggest 3 in that regard are Ben Powers, Justice Hill, and Iman Marshall, with maybe a Malik Harrison sprinkled in there. But again, third-year guys, I don't like to put that label. So many different avenues to explore in this situation. Everybody has a different definition of what a make or break year truly is. I don't like to say this is the end all be all of everything, because there is potential for a guy to blossom even after having a down year when he really needed a good one. So there's a lot to put into it, but I did want to have this conversation because there are some really talented young players that I think have to perform, have to put on a show here for this team, whether it is training camp, whether it is the preseason, the regular season, or whatnot, to prove that they deserve roster spots or they deserve spots on this team for future years, I think is going to be important for a lot of those young guys that we talked about here today. That's all I have here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. When we get back in tomorrow, we'll be diving into more Ravens content as usual. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you here tomorrow.